I did not say that. I filed it instead, the way I filed every reading that fell within acceptable atmospheric tolerance and therefore did not warrant a second look. I was calibrating storm response countermeasures over the perpetual hypercane belt of Vorn-Ashkeval, a world where Category 30 rotational systems circled the equator without pause, where my species had built our civilization inside reinforced trench cities specifically to survive weather that would erase a lesser species in minutes. When the survey reassignment came through, I was Ashkeval, Senior Atmospheric Threat Analyst of the Vorn Nebula Consortium, and in 196 cycles of service, I had modeled 70 planetary storm systems across 41 worlds, certified evacuation protocols for 6 billion Vorn citizens, and developed the pressure differential algorithms my entire consortium now used to predict hypercane formation 11 days before onset. I did not carry a visible wound the way Deathworlder cultures counted their cost in scar tissue. I carried mine in my left forelimb, fused permanently at an incorrect angle by a containment failure during the Vorn-Ashkeval founding storm. The hypercane that killed 40,000 of my ancestors before Trench City Protocol existed to stop it. I kept the limb unrepaired. Though repair was available, it reminded every junior analyst under my command what an unmodeled storm actually costs. Consortium Liaison Dren found me mid-calibration. New candidate, world. Designation, human. Homeworld flagged by orbital meteorological drones for reclassification. Threat tier, currently rated Class 9. Boring. The drones flagged an inconsistency in how the local population responds to their own severe weather events. In 196 cycles, I had never seen boring and inconsistency attached to the same classification. Boring worlds did not generate anomalies? That was the definition of boring. I logged the irregularity and diverted a survey vessel toward the assignment, expecting a routine correction to the drone's error within a single cycle. I brought 2 analysts. Vesk, my modeling specialist, who trusted probability curves the way I once trusted my own forelimb before it taught me curves could be wrong. And Oren, junior enough to still ask the questions my rank technically excused me from asking myself. The human world's provisional file described a moderate storm frequency planet. Rotational weather systems well within the range dozens of comparably rated worlds produced without incident. By every metric my consortium used, this should have resolved within hours. I did not expect what the drones had actually flagged. We settled our vessel in cloaked orbit above a continental plains region during what local meteorological data confirmed was an active severe weather season, and I began the standard atmospheric sweep that should have concluded the matter immediately. It did not conclude. The first anomalous entry arrived on the second day, and like every entry that followed, it announced itself as something almost too absurd to log formally. Local surveillance recorded a human male, designation later confirmed as Cole Whitfield, self-designated storm researcher, though his credentials were largely self-conferred, operating a modified ground vehicle in direct pursuit of a rotating atmospheric disturbance our own models classified as lethal beyond 91% probability at close approach. He was not evacuating. He was driving toward it, recording equipment mounted across his vehicle's exterior, narrating his own approach into a device with an escalating vocal pattern our matrix flagged, disturbingly, as excitement layered directly over documented fear response. Vesk ran the approach trajectory twice. He is decreasing distance to the vortex at a rate that will place him within the debris field in approximately 4 minutes. This is not evacuation behavior. This is not even observation distance behavior. This is approach. For what objective? I do not know. His transmitted audio references payment, 140 local currency units. I filed the entry as risk inconsistent and continued the sweep, though something in my calibrated threat response processing had already begun logging a question with no framework attached. The catalog grew, and it grew toward a pattern my 196 cycles had no classification tier to hold. I observed Whitfield's recorded voice as the vortex closed to within 400 meters, translated. Okay, I'm scared. I'm gonna say that out loud because saying it out loud means it doesn't get to just sit in my chest and get bigger. I'm scared, and we're doing this anyway, and Denise, if you're listening to this later, pay off the truck first, not the boat. Oren beside me did not speak for 11 seconds after the transmission ended. He named his fear, out loud, while approaching the exact thing causing it. Yes, unremarkable, that would be considered a failure of composure, a weakness requiring correction. I am aware of what it would be considered unremarkable. I did not elaborate further, because I did not yet have the vocabulary to explain why I no longer trusted that assessment. I observed Whitfield survive the approach. His vehicle's structural integrity held at a tolerance our own models rated as statistically improbable given the debris density he had driven through, and, within the same recording session, immediately begin cataloging storm data with an enthusiasm entirely disconnected from the fear he had voiced minutes earlier. Discussing wind shear measurements with a colleague in a tone our matrix could only describe as delight. The fear did not persist, Vesk said, disturbed in a register I had not previously heard from him. It should have persisted. Post-threat stress response in every Deathworlder species we've surveyed shows sustained elevation for hours, sometimes days. His resolved within minutes of confirmed safety. Perhaps he does not carry it the way we would. Then where does it go? I did not have an answer. I filed the question, the way I had begun filing everything that resisted resolution. Days later, I observed Whitfield's operation expand. He was not alone in this behavior. Local records confirmed an entire informal profession existed around it. Individuals who pursued the planet's most lethal atmospheric events deliberately, for research, for documentation, for reasons our economic models could only partially justify through the currency compensation involved, which was, by any calculation, insufficient to offset the mortality risk assumed. I observed a colleague of Whitfield's, a woman designation Denise Marsh, refused to accompany him on a particularly severe approach, not out of fear for herself, but stating, translated, somebody's got to stay behind and be the one who calls it in if you don't come back. That's not less important. Don't act like it is. Whitfield had, per audio record, argued this point with genuine frustration before accepting it. An internal negotiation between two humans about who would risk death and who would bear witness to it, conducted with the casual specificity of a disagreement about household duties. That is a division of mortal risk, I said, discussed with the same register they might use to divide a meal. Oren did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice carried something I had begun uneasily to recognize in my own processing. Maybe that's exactly why it works. If they treated it like what it actually is, they couldn't do it at all. The pattern sharpened on the 11th day, when a genuine severe weather emergency struck the region Whitfield operated within. Not a storm he was pursuing for documentation, but an unforecast secondary formation that struck a residential area with insufficient warning for standard evacuation. Whitfield redirected his vehicle away from the primary storm he had been tracking and toward the residential zone instead, transmitting emergency coordinates to local authorities before his own safety protocol would have required it, arriving at the impact site ahead of official emergency response. He abandoned pursuit of his own documented objective, Vesk said, running the redirect timing a third time to respond to a threat that offered him no data value and considerable additional risk. Yes, I cannot model the incentive. I no longer believe the incentive requires modeling, Vesk. I believe it requires acceptance. The crisis, when it arrived through our own failure, the way it always does. Our vessel's atmospheric stabilization field, strained by continuous exposure to the region's severe rotational weather activity across 11 days of extended observation, fractured during a routine repositioning above the residential zone Whitfield had redirected toward. Vesk caught the fault 5 seconds before critical failure, insufficient time for controlled displacement. We came down hard in an open field at the edge of the same residential area, cloak failing entirely on impact. Secondary tornadic activity still active less than 2 kilometers distant. My own lower carapace crushed against a support strut in a position that made independent extraction, by Oren's diagnostic readout, structurally impossible without assistance. Neither she nor Vesk, both smaller framed, could provide alone under active storm conditions. Consortium protocol was absolute. A vessel suffering catastrophic failure over an uncontacted world during active hazard conditions executes silent emergency extraction regardless of crew injury, or accepts total loss rather than risk direct contact during an already compromised event. I gave the order. It failed. The same fracture that had grounded us had corrupted our extraction beacon beyond field repair, and secondary storm activity was tracking, per Vesk's readings, directly toward our exposed position with an 11-minute window before renewed lethal wind exposure. I do not fully understand, even now, what made me transmit an open distress signal in direct violation of 196 cycles of doctrine I had personally enforced, rather than accept silent loss as protocol demanded. I told the tribunal afterward that the secondary storm's approach made silent loss for all 3 crew members statistically certain rather than merely probable, and that was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I had spent 11 days watching a man drive toward the exact thing that terrified him because someone needed the data, and some part of my calibrated threat framework had concluded, without authorization, that if my crew was going to be caught exposed in a storm we could not survive, it should happen near the one human on this planet who had already proven he would drive toward danger rather than away from it, if there was any reason at all to believe it would help someone. Cole Whitfield was 800 meters away, still responding to the primary residential emergency, when our distress beacon transmitted on an open frequency. His own storm monitoring equipment happened to intercept. He did not run a threat assessment on an unidentified alien signal during an active tornado warning. He redirected his vehicle toward our coordinates immediately, arriving as the secondary formation's outer wind band began tearing debris across the open field where we lay exposed. He did not hesitate at my physiology. He got out of his vehicle into wind our sensors confirmed exceeded safe human exposure thresholds, shouting toward Oren and Vesk, translated, "In the truck, now. We've got maybe 4 minutes before that thing's on top of us," before turning to the strut pinning me, assessing it with the same rapid, practical focus he applied to storm data and saying, breathless, narrating exactly the way he had narrated his fear into his recording device 11 days earlier. Okay, big guy, I don't know what you are, and I don't have time to figure it out. I just need you to not be under this when the wind picks up." He got the strut free with Vesk's assistance, hauling me toward the vehicle as debris began streaking past us horizontally, his voice climbing with the same documented fear pattern I had catalogued days earlier, used now not for a camera but for himself, out loud, so it would not paralyze him at the exact moment paralysis would have killed all 4 of us. It was in that moment, dragged into the shelter of a storm chaser's vehicle by a man who had spent his entire adult life driving toward the thing everyone else fled from, that I understood my fused forelimb had never meant what 196 cycles of Consortium doctrine told me it meant. I had believed it meant I have modeled what an unprepared storm costs, and I keep the wound so I never underestimate it again. Held against Cole Whitfield's hands, hauling me clear of debris while he narrated his own fear aloud to keep it from stopping him, I understood the forelimb meant something far smaller. I had learned to fear storms by calculating them precisely enough to never face one unprepared. He faced them prepared for nothing but the decision to go anyway. I did not say this to him. I filed it, because filing was the only vocabulary 196 cycles had given me for something this large. And even as he got all 3 of us into his vehicle and drove clear of the secondary formation's path, still talking, still narrating, I catalogued the sensation the only way I knew how. Structural realignment, category unresolved, severity, total. The review came 8 days later aboard the recovery vessel, under a tribunal I had helped establish decades earlier. Consortium Elder Thassa presided. "You transmitted an open distress beacon during an active hazard event over an uncontacted world. You accepted direct rescue assistance from a local sentient during that same event, in violation of protocol you personally drafted. Do you dispute the record?" "I do not dispute the record." "Then justify your continued position on this transcript alone." I did not read from prepared documentation. 196 cycles of atmospheric modeling had given me precise vocabulary for pressure differentials and rotational velocity, and none of it contained the argument I needed, so I built the case from the catalog instead. "Elder Thassa, I have modeled 70 planetary storm systems. I know precisely what unprepared exposure to severe weather costs a species. I carry the proof in my own forelimb. I have 11 days of continuous observation of a human who drives toward the exact conditions that terrify him, states that fear aloud rather than suppressing it, and uses the narration itself as the mechanism that lets him keep moving through it. I watched him abandon his own documented objective to respond to a threat offering him no benefit, and when my own crew was exposed to conditions he had spent his career studying, and therefore understood better than we did, he came for us with 4 minutes of warning and no data on what we even were. I do not have a classification tier for a species that treats its own fear as a tool to be spoken aloud and worked through rather than a weakness to be eliminated. I am not asking this consortium to feel anything about that. I am asking it to explain, on the evidence, how a Class 9 designation survives contact with a species that runs toward the exact thing our own models say should paralyze them. You are describing an individual, Thassa said, though her voice had lost its opening edge. Not a planetary classification. I am describing a behavior pattern this survey confirmed across an entire informal profession on that world, Elder. Storm pursuit for data, division of mortal risk discussed like household chores, and voiced fear used as fuel rather than treated as failure. I have the footage. I do not have full certainty what it means for their classification. I am certain only that boring cannot survive this record. The chamber held silent long enough that I believed I had achieved nothing. Your position is suspended pending formal review, Thassa said finally. Not revoked. The classification is logged, provisionally, as reclassification pending, psychological profile anomalous. This consortium has never applied that designation to a Class 9 world. It will require extended study before any analyst, present or future, closes this file. It was not vindication. It was a door left open rather than sealed, and I understood, filing the ruling, that it was more than my breach of protocol had any right to earn me. I wrote my formal assessment across the following days in the technical language the consortium required. Approach trajectory data, stress response timelines, cross-referenced incident logs. Buried in the final appendix, where doctrine does not require sentiment and therefore will not scrutinize it, I wrote, Subject Cole Whitfield demonstrates repeated, voluntary approach towards statistically lethal atmospheric conditions, accompanied by voiced fear response used as a documented coping mechanism rather than suppressed as weakness, at a frequency inconsistent with any Class 9 behavioral model in consortium records. I cannot certify this species as unremarkable. I cannot certify the mechanism by which they convert fear into forward motion without our own doctrine to explain it. I can certify only that a species which speaks its fear aloud and drives toward danger anyway, consistently, cannot remain filed as boring under any framework this consortium currently maintains. The report moved up the chain to elders who had never had a stranger's hands, haul them clear of debris during a storm they had spent their career studying from a safe analytical distance. I returned to limited duty once the inquiry closed without formal sanction, uncertain whether I had earned that mercy or simply been extended one I had not yet learned how to repay. I keep an unofficial file now, one no consortium has requested. Passive surveillance confirms Cole Whitfield is unchanged. He has continued, in the months since our contact, driving toward storms for the same modest payment, narrating his fear into the same recording device, humming with the same restless energy Denise Marsh still argues with him about every time he leaves. I do not fully understand what compels a species to run toward the thing that frightens it most. I have stopped needing to understand it to respect it. I do not look at my fused forelimb the way I once did. For 196 cycles it meant I have calculated what an unprepared storm costs, and I carry the proof so I never underestimate it again. I understand now it meant something smaller. I had learned to fear storms by refusing to face one without total preparation. He faced them with nothing but a voice, saying the fear out loud, and going anyway. I do not know if I will encounter Cole Whitfield again. My consortium has not authorized further contact, and I have not requested it, though the request remains drafted, unsent, in the same file as everything else about this world I have not yet closed. If it comes to that, if some future crisis brings me into range of a species my own doctrine still cannot fully classify, I have already decided what I will do. I am simply waiting for the moment someone asks it of me.